You're young, but your future looks bleak. Your family's been rooted in this country for decades, but money's tight, property taxes are crushing, and opportunities feel out of reach. But then, boom! Oil explodes from the ground, and overnight, you go from struggling to even get some food on the table to being called the richest colored girl in the world. This was the early 1900s. This was the story of a black family, descendants of freed slaves who struck oil. That's what the movie Sarah's Oil is actually all about, which is based on a 2014 book, Searching for Sarah Rector, the richest black girl in America by Tanya Bolden. The movie will follow Sarah Rector in the early 1900s. She's a young girl who hits it big and eventually becomes one of the first female African-American millionaires. But here's the part most people don't realize. Sarah's fortune was only possible because of the history of the 5 civilized tribes. And that's what we're going to break down today, the opportunity that created the possibility for Sarah's Oil in the first place. So these tribes weren't just scattered survivors of forced removal, even though they were nations that rebuilt themselves in Indian territory with grit, strategy, and vision. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. The 5 civilized tribes consisted of Cherokee, who created their own written language in 1821. This made them one of the first indigenous groups in North America with a written constitution, newspapers like the Cherokee Phoenix, and widespread literacy. Imagine the power proper literacy can give you during this time period. Then we've got the Choctaw, who during World War I, the Choctaw soldiers became the first code talkers, using their language to transmit unbreakable military code. On top of trying to decipher a brand new language you've never heard of, you also have to decipher it in code. Then we've got the Chickasaw. They were known as the Spartans of the Southeast. What a crazy title. By early European settlers because of their reputation as fierce warriors who rarely lost in battle. You don't want to face these guys one-on-one. Then we've got the Creek Confederacy, aka the Muskogee, who not a single tribe, but a powerful alliance of many towns and nations. Each town was politically autonomous, but united for defense, trade, and diplomacy. Now we've got the tribe, the Seminoles. I believe I'm saying that correctly, but they were the only one of the 5 tribes never to sign a peace treaty with the United States government. They resisted removal fiercely in the Seminole Wars of Florida, with many fleeing into the Everglades, where today their descendants still live. All in all, these nations, these tribes weren't your ordinary tribes, and they were labeled the 5 civilized tribes. Now, this was by the US government because despite all the fighting and resistance they did adopt European American ways relatively easily. They built governments, became literate, wrote constitutions, practiced Christianity, and yes, they even participated in slavery. Don't let the civilized label confuse you. Yes, they created their own governments, schools, and economies, but the story of the so-called 5 civilized tribes, slavery, and Sarah Rector are tightly linked. Take the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Creek, who all held enslaved African Americans in large numbers. The Seminoles were different. Many black Seminoles lived freely among them, intermarried, and fought as allies. This caused friction with the other tribes and with slave-holding Southerners, but this was their way. So, during the Civil War alliance, though, most of the tribes sided with the Confederacy, mainly because they wanted to protect their sovereignty and slave-holding practices. The Seminoles split, though. Some of them went to the Union and some of them went to the Confederacy. But ultimately, the Union would win and force the tribes to sign new treaties in 1866. These new treaties said slavery must end in Indian territory. Freemen, the black people enslaved by the tribes and their descendants, had to be recognized as citizens, and citizenship came with something powerful: the right to land allotment. So enter in Sarah Rector's parents, Joseph and Rose, who were Creek freemen. This meant their children were automatically entitled to land under the Treaty of 1866. Now, let's be real, the government wasn't handing out prime real estate to freemen. Sarah's allotment was dry, rocky, and 60 miles away from her family. The taxes were a burden, and her father even begged to sell it off because of those burdens. Shocker, the courts said no. Now, on the surface, it looked like a curse, but actually a blessing in disguise because hidden beneath the worthless soil was black gold. Unable to sell the land, her father decided to rent it out, and in 1913, an oil digger hit a gusher on Sarah's land. Suddenly, this 11-year-old girl was earning $300 a day. I know that doesn't sound like much, but back then, that's the equivalent of over $10,000 every single day in today's money, pending some overhead. So you can imagine news spread like a wildfire. The newspapers went wild. Requests for marriages were coming in, money and loans. All of this poured in. Well, keeping in mind, this is a little girl that we're still talking about here, a child. Here's where it gets even funnier. Politicians even tried to classify her as a honorary white so she could ride in first-class train cars. This is nuts. See what money can do no matter which era you live in. Now, with wealth comes danger. We all know this because she was black and the law required her estate to be managed by a white guardian, of course. That opened the door to exploitation and corruption until leaders like Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois stepped in to protect her. After an article by African-American journal The Chicago Defender began to take an interest in Rector, Booker T. Washington, founder of the Tuskegee Institute and leading voice for Black advancement through education and entrepreneurship, he invited Sarah to Tuskegee to meet with him, give her some advice. He was so concerned about her well-being since many white guardians, spectators, and politicians were trying to control her oil money. Washington publicly supported her, helping to protect her image as a capable young black girl instead of letting newspapers and opportunists exploit her. Then we've got Du Bois, co-founder of the NAACP. He and the NAACP investigated whether she was being exploited by these white guardians who had control over many wealthy black miners in Oklahoma already. Du Bois helped ensure that Sarah received a greater legal protection and that her wealth stayed in her family's hands instead of being siphoned off. Luckily, the girl had all of these guys to help her out because it definitely wasn't easy navigating life in these circumstances, especially for a young, recently rich black girl who probably doesn't know anything. Here's the bottom line. Sarah's story doesn't exist without the history of the 5 civilized tribes because of the slavery inside these tribes, because of the Treaty of 1866, because of freeman descendants were given land allotments. So Sarah's family ended up with property that ultimately paved the way for a future she could never have imagined. And that land, against all odds, had the oil. Now, future Sarah did go through some issues. She did lose some money. There are some problems here and there, but we're not going to explore that too much right now. What we're here to focus on is out of forced treaties, racial injustice, and displacement came one of the greatest rags to riches stories in American history. Sarah Rector's life is a reminder that history is not simple, no matter how you look at it. Her fortune was born out of pain, resilience, survival, woven into a legacy of native nation, slavery, and black struggle in America, all jumbled in together to even make it possible in the first place. So with this new movie on the way, the big question is, will we get a deeper history of the 5 tribes? Will they even be mentioned? The freeman stuff? We'll see how it goes. Either way, it's a very interesting tale to tell. Sarah's story alone is something to behold. So it's definitely one that should be told, and I'm looking forward to it regardless. Like, comment, subscribe, share this out, and until next time, what's the best recent film you've seen?